What is the challenge? It is about governance.
Firstly, I think when we look back in 5 to 10 years, we will see that this election was catalytic in the realignment of politics. We believe that the political boundaries dividing political parties are obsolete, that many people in many different parties share the same value and vision, and that many of the racial barriers of the past are making it difficult for all of us to come together and build a new majority. And we believe that has to happen around 4 key principles. The first is constitutionalism and the rule of law, obviously curbs on the exercise of power, which is central to any democracy. Secondly, an open market economy as the basis for successful strategies to beat poverty, to create jobs, and to include everybody in the economy, with the state playing a facilitative role rather than a controlling role in the process. The third principle is non-racialism and how we approach redress. Are we going to approach redress to deal with the dreadful legacy of apartheid in a way that overcomes racial divisions or in a way that permanently entrenches them? And the fourth principle is the separation of party and state, which should be subsumed under the first, which is constitutionalism, but because it is so critical to our country and because the erosion of that separation is undermining so much of what we're trying to build in this country, we have to hold it up as a key principle on its own. And of course, we know that those are the core insights of the National Development Plan. And they're the core insights of many individuals in many parties, if you look at the manifestos of the different parties. And interestingly enough, the dividing line between the people who are trying to promote those principles and those who oppose them in many ways actually runs right through the middle of the ANC. What we've learned in the last 20 years of our democracy is that constitutionalism is very, very vulnerable. You don't need a 2/3 majority to change the Constitution. You can actually undermine it without changing a word of it, by deploying cadres to institutions that are supposed to be independent of the ruling clique, of the ruling party. And we've seen how the ANC has changed in respect of the Constitution. Mandela championed the Constitution and defended it. Mbeki certainly did to a very significant extent, not nearly as much as Mandela, but certainly to a significant extent. And we believe that President Zuma does not. In fact, we think that his fundamental misunderstanding is about what constitutionalism is, really symbolized by his statement, "Who do the judges think they are? They weren't elected, we were," or words to that effect. And so a fundamental misunderstanding of constitutionalism defines the Zuma presidency. And we can do all we possibly can to put the issues before the voters, but the question in the end is, did the voters take their responsibility to hold a power-abusing government to account? And the image that will always remain with me is the one on our oversight visit to Nkandla. You'll recall that the government was refusing to answer any questions about Nkandla in the National Parliament, and so we took a decision to walk to Nkandla to see for ourselves. We got all the permissions and we did what had to be done. And it was amazing for me to see it at first hand, the incredible opulence of it and the scale. And then to see people from a poverty-stricken surrounding community coming out and doing everything they could to prevent us proceeding along that road, because they were defending Jacob Zuma's palace surrounded by poverty. And the outcome of this election depends on the DA doing well enough to form a stable core of a possible coalition government in 2019, or even the stable core of a new merged entity that can govern South Africa according to the Constitution and Nelson Mandela's dream. Thank you very much.
The South African story as President Mbeki aptly described it, is one of two realities. History afforded some privilege, and it burdened many more with poverty and strife. The divides of the past and our present economy have naturally manifested themselves across our political spectrum. While the ANC has embodied the struggles of the disenfranchised masses, other political parties have been the very representation of minority privilege and continue in their daily existence to seek to preserve those privileges. The ANC has at every election stated its policies and gone into an election with a plan. So, to generalize as if all of us are preoccupied with the Nkandla debates and other things is really unfortunate. The fact of the matter is that the DA is preoccupied with the Nkandla. The rest of us, or some of us, are talking about our policies and our plans and what we seek to do over the next 5 to 20 years. The fundamental question before the people of South Africa in these coming elections is not the realignment of politics or the disintegration of the ANC. That's peripheral. The fundamental issue, the critical question that these elections must answer is how do we radically and more meaningfully transform the South African economy? That's what these elections are about. Realignment of politics is coincidental if it will happen. It's been tried before, it didn't happen. This election, therefore, in our view, is about development. And the next election will also be about development. We have set ourselves a 20-year trajectory to do something meaningful with the South African economy and ensure that we not only recover from the slump we suffered as a result of the global recession, but we are able to position our economy towards a higher growth level than we ever achieved in the past, so that we can create sustainable and decent employment for most South Africans. And finally, the election is not really about Zuma, as some would like us to believe. It's an election about a concerted effort to develop our society. And that is what should preoccupy the minds of South Africans. We all understand that an election is an emotional period, a lot takes place, a lot of discussions take place. But when the dust settles, the elections having been run, the country will have to return to what are the essentials we must do in order to move South Africa forward. And that is to transform the South African economy and raise it to a new level of growth and development where we will achieve social inclusions for the majority of South Africans. And it's only on the basis of this meaningful transformation that we can achieve the objective of creating a non-racial society. Moving away from a multiracial society where different South Africans just simply coexist, but towards a real meaningful non-racial society where, as President Oliver Tambo once said, there will neither be blacks nor whites, but South Africans united in their diversity. Thank you.
This day, the 10th of April, in 1993, South Africa lost what I can only regard as the colossal giant in our struggle for liberation. So I will say, long live the undying spirit of Chris Hani, long live. Just 10 days before he was brutally gunned down, in an interview you conducted on the 31st of March with a writer, Luli Kalinokos, he had this to say about the challenges moving forward clearly speaking about the post-elections era. And I quote him, "The ANC will have to fight a new enemy. That enemy would be another struggle to make freedom and democracy worthwhile to ordinary South Africans. Our biggest enemy will be that," let me repeat, "our biggest enemy will be what we do in the field of socio-economic restructuring, the creation of jobs, building of houses, schools, medical facilities, overhauling our education, eliminating illiteracy, building a society which cares, and fighting corruption." So today, challenging time, divisions in the organizations, divisions in the people's camp. I have said that most of the divisions are not necessarily caused by ideological or political differences. I have said that most of the divisions and strife in organizations are caused by attempts by various factions to push each other away from the dinner table. It is increasingly becoming normal to shout from the rooftops when those we consider our enemies are found with their hands in the cookie bar, or in the cookie jar rather, in the cookie jar, and yet bury our heads in the sand when those politically close to us, or who we perceive as critical players in our political games, misuse the public purse for their personal business and spit in the face of our people. On social issues, they do indeed, that's the ANC government, have a good story to tell. But on hardcore economic transformation, the story is not good at all. And yet, despite all of these advances in 1994, we are seeing an unprecedented levels and wave of strikes at the community levels. Clear evidence that millions of South Africans feel that they have been left out of a new South Africa. Workers are demanding that the people share in the country's wealth as promised by the Freedom Charter. And they are speaking through their structures, but more importantly these days, they are speaking in the streets. I would have liked to speak about the extent of our inequalities in society. I hope that somebody asks that question so that I can get an opportunity. I would have liked to speak more about the extent of poverty and the dehumanizing unemployment afflicting over 7.5 million South Africans, which is a combined population of Durban and Cape Town. But I guess that, too much energy after 8 months. And thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity.
Minister, despite what you said, this is not simply the DA making your good story bad. There is a bad story in this country. Madiba, of course, created a world where hope burned brightly for years. All was possible. When he left the political stage, the decline began. Our struggle now is against old enemies, the tyranny of impunity, corruption, refusal of accountability. I mean, to have a president saying, I didn't ask for what's happening in my homestead, and so I owe you nothing. That's the extent of impunity that we are dealing with. It is theft from those who stood to gain from freedom that so many died fighting for. If those of us who laid the bedrock that Madiba built on stand back, what will be left for our grandchildren? Standing back is not an option. It is not an option for me, nor is it an option, as we increasingly hear from Ronnie Castros, from Jay Naidu, from Trevor Manuel, nor for the thousands of ANC stalwarts who mourn the loss of their ANC. This country bows and scrapes before one man. He's called number one. The obsession, I dare say, Minister, with Mr. Zuma is within the ANC. They are the people who are obsessed with Zuma. They were prepared to kill for Zuma. And now, one has to acknowledge that the opposition is severely limited as well. That we have to acknowledge that we don't have the kind of mass appeal, mass energizing of South Africa's people that can remove this government which is governing with such impunity. In 2009, 13 million people didn't vote because they couldn't bring themselves to vote for a corrupt ANC, nor to vote for the DA or any of the parties that were there. Here we are facing an election in a few weeks' time. No other democracy anywhere in the world would be contemplating that a government with this track record of corruption and failure of performance at the very basic things would be expecting to be returned. As we did in the mid-70s, we fight against an opponent that many believe is unmovable. We will move this giant, just as we moved apartheid. It is a fight we will fight to answer the cries of those millions left out in the political wilderness. It is a fight I have fought before. It is a fight AHANG will win, together with empowered citizens across this nation. It is a fight worth fighting. Thank you.
Those speeches that you heard have empowered you for May the 7th. I hope you know where you're going to put your cross. If you don't, we're going to ask some questions now, and maybe that will assist you. The first question I'm going to pose to the leader of the Democratic Alliance. She's been sitting for quite a while, and we know that she has to be on the campaign trail again quite soon. So, Ms. Zille, you dedicated a lot of your speech to, just like the leader of AHANG, you dedicated a lot of your speech to the President of South Africa and what you perceive has gone wrong under his leadership. What I wanted to find out from you is, if Zuma was not the ANC's presidential candidate, if the ANC suddenly decided today to replace him with your new hero, former President Mbeki, or if they decided that Minister Malusi Gigaba, who is as straight and clean as they come, that he should be the presidential candidate, what would be your problem with the ANC then?
Well, and Jenny, as you probably heard, I didn't mention Zuma very often in my address. I said when we look backwards in 10 years' time, what will this election have been about? What should it have been about? And how can we make it about those things? And that is what I was talking about. Now, quite frankly, who leads the ANC has become almost irrelevant. I think that Jacob Zuma just symbolizes very graphically what has become of that party. It has become a closed, crony-driven system that sees politics as an internal struggle for power to be able to dispense patronage and deploy cadres. And whoever leads it is going to be inserted into a system with that value set, so it almost makes it irrelevant who the individual is. Because cadres are deployed and advantages sought in terms of tenders, jobs, promotions, and access to wealth. And it creates a system of insiders and outsiders that is not going to be broken down by any individual. It's a systemic problem now. Further, the critical thing about the ANC, and I agree with Mampila about this, is that it sees the state as the driver of the economy and the determinant of whether or not people get jobs. And we, as I said, believe, and we have spelt it out very clearly in our 8% growth and jobs plan, that the state plays a facilitative role. It has many, many things to do, which is spelled out in the Constitution, but when it does its job properly, it creates a conducive climate for investment and growth that creates jobs. And we have modeled our plan, and we believe that is so, and it's fundamentally different from the point of departure of the ANC, and indeed of Zwelinzima Vavi, but all the historical evidence really is on our side about how one creates growth and jobs. So it really makes very little difference who is in charge of the ANC. Jacob Zuma has just exemplified what a closed crony system results in. It's a system that feeds the big man, who in turn looks after his acolytes. And that has become entrenched in many, many failed transitions, and it is symbolized by the ANC.
My question is to the Secretary General of COSATU. I'm happy to hear that, Albie Sachs asked the question in 1989, what do the white comrades read when they go to bed? I'm happy to see that the black middle classes are reading Chinese philosophy when they go to bed. I want to put a question to you about leadership and values-based leadership. You, as COSATU, will over the next month be campaigning for the retention of the ANC as the party in power. How do you square all the things you've said in the past and today about values-based leadership with the fact that the leader of the ANC, as other speakers have already said, is a person who, you quoted united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic values in quoting Chris Hani. The leader of the African National Congress does not, by many accounts, seem to be a person who embodies these values. So how do you square your campaign over the next month for a party that is led by a leader of this nature?
There has been a discussion in the Federation over a period of time, and when I was speaking, I reflected about the moment and the period of great difficulties and what is at the center stage of that division. Certainly, I was not in a way isolating the moral issues. I was emphasizing on the transformative issues as how they will impact on the working class. COSATU have taken a decision to support the ANC, and they have been on a campaign to support the ANC. They were in public in support of the ANC manifesto and all of that. All I can tell you at this stage, and I hope that you understand this, that the type of divisions that have played themselves up in a way also relate to the issues that I was emphasizing and the issues that we are asking the questions around now. We have made a commitment on Wednesday to engage internally on those issues. We will engage over the next few days and hopefully get a united COSATU voice in saying whatever we will be able to say, bearing in mind the 4 weeks to the elections, bearing in mind how the divisions have played themselves out precisely because of the issues that I was raising in my address. So I'm not going to answer your question more directly than I've done. You will say I'm dodging the question, but all I'm saying is that there has been a serious divisions. You heard the unions in public about what their views are about the elections, some in great support, some very cold, some believing that the manifesto does not take the Congress resolutions anywhere far, some saying that they have been betrayed, blah, blah, blah. Let's allow that discussion internally in the Federation.
This one sort of pops up for me. This is from Shanta Blumen. There is a woman, and this is for the minister. There's a woman who runs a small creche in an orange farm. It serves the poorest kids. She has been in a legal battle with the city of Johannesburg over municipal bylaws. Although they pay a lease to the city of Joburg, she cannot get the right accreditation for the creche, so she cannot get state subsidies. The people of the orange farm, like many other communities, initially squatted on their land. 20 years on, they still do not have title deeds and operate under municipal bylaws that are meant for Santon. Why is this so? Why has land reform not addressed the immediate needs of peri-urban areas? And I would extend that to the urban areas.
You know, this is precisely the reason why you need a dedicated ministry focusing on the interests and needs of small business. Because you then would have a dedicated focus on assisting people such as those, responding to their concerns, ensuring that the different tiers of government are able to align their policies to be able to assist people such as those. That's precisely the reason, and I think that the question illustrates the point. It's quite well and easy when you've made a couple of millions in the private sector, when you are well entrenched, when you are well entrenched with the vested sectors of the economy, to believe that those who are socially excluded, who are in the second economy, the marginalized economy, do not need the type of dedicated support that they need in order to break ranks. Now, the youth of our country are correct to be impatient, particularly with the changes in the economy, but the youth employment incentives, the changes in the education system that have been introduced, that have massified university education and ensured that hundreds of thousands of young South Africans have access to university education, have helped to lift the quality of lives of young people upwards. And going forward with the infrastructure program, the industrialization programs, the youth employment incentive programs, that is, and the decision that 60% of all new jobs in the infrastructure program must be set aside for young people, and about 60% of new opportunities in the economy in terms of empowerment must be set aside for young people. those programs should change the lives of young people so that going forward, they are going to benefit from the South African socio-economic transformation.
Thanks.
My appeal to young people is there can be no economic freedom without education and training. That is why AHANG is committed to high quality education that is free for every South African from grade north to higher education. The National Student Financial Aid is bankrupt and so corrupt that education has become a death sentence for a lot of young people. We don't need that bureaucracy. We simply have to offer young people, and that's what AHANG is offering, a path that will enable each one of South Africa's young people to develop their talents to the highest level that's possible. They pay back by working for the state for 3 years or else through the tax system. Second, we have young people who are walking our streets, minimum 5 million or more. We believe that by shutting down the SETAs, we can turn that money to sweeping up every young person who's washing cars, parking cars, totally despondent. Put them on the job training opportunities so that they can develop whatever skill that they have. And those who can read and write will be given a second chance to have adult basic education, so they will be able to be their own job creators or else be employable. Third, we believe that the program that AHANG is proposing of small and medium enterprises, where they live, they don't have to catch a train to go into town to find opportunities. But we believe that by taking away the bureaucracy that currently is killing entrepreneurship, we can create a vibrant small and medium enterprise system that generates 70% of the jobs that we need in this country. We are a country which is spending more on small and medium enterprises for the lowest return. Other countries, 60% of their jobs plus are created by small and medium, and that's why we want to focus on that. And finally, we believe that AHANG's focus on effective government makes sure that your tax money, your grandparents' tax money, is not stolen for fire pools and other things, but it is there to make sure we've got the right social and fiscal infrastructure so we can have a thriving economy. This country is a wealthy country. We should not have people living in destitution. The only reason we have continued poverty, incidentally, it's not 300 years that's generating that. Kids were born in 1994 are poor today because of the ineffective, corrupt government that we've got. We can make every South African food secure, skilled, and being able to earn a dignified livelihood. That's the offer of AHANG.
Thanks.
My view,
You don't have a party, Zulu.
I have no party. I have,
You nearly did, and you may still.
she always fears that I'm going to create a party more than anybody in the ANC fears.
I would love you to. I would love you to.
In my view, the EFF would not be existing today if it was not because of the internal problems in the ANC.
Yeah.
And that's a starting point. Is as a result of the rupture that I was referring to in my address, the difficulties about the moment, the state of the revolution, the direction of the revolution, amongst others, not limited to those.
That's fine.
I know from the statistics that the great numbers of young people have not registered to vote. So they may not going to be the biggest issue that this elections is going to be about in reality, because they are just simply too demoralized. And nobody have inspired them to go in droves to go and register. I think that's the reality of our situation. About a third of them that have registered are spread across all the parties, the EFF and the ANC included. I've certainly not seen them running in big droves to your party or into... Don't be confused by the 1,000 that marched to the ANC house. But not in the numbers that we should be talking about. I guess because of everything that will eventually happen because of the crisis of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, there will be a moment when the youth again believes in the politics. But for now and for these elections, I think that we have missed the boat. They have just not registered. About 2/3 of them are not going to be participating in these elections. And that's, to me, a very sad moment for a country with only 20 years into a democracy.
Ms. Zille?
Well, just to follow on from what Zwelinzima said, I would say to young people that bad governments are elected by good people who don't bother to vote. And that is a big problem in our society as a whole. Now, I would also say that the key issue for young people in this election is about their future, particularly about whether they can get a job with good career prospects on which to build a better life. And that is the key issue for every South African, frankly, but primarily for young South Africans. And then I would say to them, examine the policies of the parties. Which party has policies that are tried and tested to improve education and align it with the needs of the economy? Which party has a viable funding model for student financial aid, right from the start of school through the end of tertiary education, that guarantees everyone with the ability and commitment to hard work the right to get a tertiary education on a viable model? Which party has the best policies to grow the economy, to enable small businesses to start and flourish and support them? Which party supports BEE that creates jobs, not just a few billionaires? Which party helps people to get a first job and job experience and training and mentorship? And which party is already turning those policies into reality where it governs? And the answer would be there's only one party doing that, and that's the Democratic Alliance. And vote for the party that has the best and viable option to beat poverty in one generation.
I'm going to ask a final question to Minister Malusi Gigaba. Can you tell us what do you think would have been an appropriate reaction to 246 million rand being spent on the President's house? How should we have reacted to this? And how should we be dealing as a society, as a responsible society? How should we be dealing with the ANC? How should we be holding you responsible? How should we be interacting with you when things like this happen, in what you think will not be a hostile way?
Look, I can't determine for anybody how they ought to react to this. I can only speak for how the ANC reacts to it. Because whether the Nkandla price inflation happened or did not, the people who don't like the ANC would remain not liking it. Now, how the ANC reacts to it is by saying, yes, we support the investigation by the public protector, we support the investigation by the interministerial committee, We eagerly await the finalization of the investigations of the Special Investigations Unit so that the necessary legal action against anybody implicated, whether political or not, can then ensue. Ultimately, the courts of South Africa will be the final arbiters as to who did what, because we all agree that the inflation of the prices, the corruption that resulted in the cost of the project escalating to the extent that it did was unacceptable. That there are people who need to account for what happened, and secondly, beyond the legal action that needs to be taken, there is a need to further tighten the governance systems so that in the future, and the future, I'm not talking about a distant period, I'm talking about what happens now, that we know that there was a lapse in the governance systems. We need to ensure that the governance systems are tightened up to such an extent that in the future, we do not have a recurrence of similar incidences.
Okay, but do you think we're hostile to you?
The hostility towards the ANC is independent of this was just a trigger. But the hostility towards the ANC is independent of this. As I say, the ANC itself, the president himself, are unhappy about the escalation of the cost of this project and the very fact that there was a lapse in the governance systems.
Thank you. One last question to the two opposition parties and to Mr. Vavi. You both had a major tie-up cooperation. You've both spoken eloquently about a realignment of our politics and an opposition coalition of some sort. Are you two talking to each other? I see Mr. Vavi sitting between you. And Mr. Vavi, to you, I'd like to know how interesting you find the idea mooted by NUMSA of a form of Labour Party. How interesting do you find that to be? Thank you.
Realignment, as I define it, is not a coalition of opposition parties, and we must stop thinking about it in those terms. It is about, as I said at the beginning, bringing people who agree on the same value set together in the same political party to constitute a new majority. And we are kept apart by historical factors in a context where the current political boundaries of parties has become completely obsolete. So I feel very strongly that realignment is necessary to overcome the divisions of the past so that we can build a new non-racial majority around core principles. And that would take in not only many of the current opposition parties, although obviously not all, but it would also take in a very large slice of people who are currently in the ANC. If you look at the National Development Plan, it is inimical to the vision that Minister Gigaba set out here and to the role of state control in the economy. So the big problem is that we have a ruling party that is so divided that it cannot give any leadership on any issue, and it may produce a national development plan out of the planning ministry and the presidency, but that certainly can't be implemented, let alone landed in budgets and driven transversely across portfolios, which is the challenge in government. So until we have an ideologically coherent new majority built on a political philosophy that can result in policies with goals and aims that are landed in budgets, we are not going to have any progress in South Africa, no matter what anybody says. So the goal of realignment is to get everybody together who believes in constitutionalism and the rule of law, what it actually means, which is a limitation on power and not power abuse. Secondly, an open market economy to grow the economy through enterprise and through skills development that achieves the kind of rapid growth with jobs that we need. Thirdly, a real commitment to non-racialism and BEE, that achieves the redress of the legacy of the past without entrenching racial categories and quotas. And that's exactly what the NDP believes in, and many other people believe in that. And fourthly, and I really mention it as a critical factor, is the separation between party and state. All of the abuse of state funds currently to fund the ANC's election program is a travesty. But this notion also that party cadres can be deployed into institutions of state to turn them into extensions of the ruling party is going to entirely destroy our democracy. So those four principles are believed in by people in the ANC, in Ahang, in COPE, in a whole host of other parties, and also championed by the Democratic Alliance. And by realignment of politics, I mean that those people need to get together in a new political majority, and we can do that in the transition through coalitions, but eventually we have to establish a new majority that can win elections and fulfill the vision and the dream that we had in 1994. That's what I mean by realignment, not a coalition of opposition parties.
I agree with Helen in terms of those principles that she set out. And I believe actually South Africans are much closer together than they understand and are prepared to acknowledge. The devil is always in the detail of how you get it done. And I am absolutely committed to this realignment. And I believe it's got to be a journey that is enabled. Perhaps we need, what do they call them? Elderly statespeople who can in fact keep the country's interests first on the table and enable all of us to come round to realizing that in fact there is much more in common than what divides us. But I think there is also the reality that the persistent inequalities between the have and the have-nots, which still is color-coded, is a problem. And we need, in that whole mix, BEE has not produced the broad participation that we're talking about. This country is majority black. If we were to run an effective government with real transformation of the economy, and by that, I don't just mean having black shareholders. I'm talking about transformation of the way in which we reshape the economy to address the structural problems in the mining industry, in the agricultural industry, and in many of the other sectors, and to strengthen the Competition Commission. This is the only country in Africa where we're paying as much as we're paying for cell phones, for banking costs, and so on. It's crazy.
Thank you, Dr. Rampile.
So we have a lot in common that we can work on, and I think this country is destined for greatness if we can come around to deal with what we have in common.
Okay, so more kissing in future, right? Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We want to thank... Mr. Vavi, do you want to add something?
They just...
I think we keep having to remind you that you don't have a party.
Yeah. But I do have strong views, though. The first one, my criticism to my comrade Malosi. If you want people to believe in the future, be honest with the mistake you're committing today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was our political panel. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your tweets and emails. We really appreciate it, and we hope you enjoyed that session. Thank you.
What is the challenge? It is about governance.